So let's talk about Daenerys Targaryen's grandfather, King Jaehaerys II of House Targaryen. He ruled Westeros for only 3 years, and the guy didn't live to see 40. All his life, Jaehaerys was seen as sickly, as weak. He was always in pretty poor health. His father, King Aegon V, had Jaehaerys and 4 other children, and he wanted them to break with Targaryen tradition when it came to marriages. The typical Targaryen way is to keep it in the family, and Aegon V actually wanted his children to marry outside the family. Jaehaerys' older brother, Prince Duncan, he was the heir to the Iron Throne. He was betrothed to a Baratheon girl, but he sacks her off and marries Jenny of Oldstones, and he forfeits his inheritance as well. So that makes Jaehaerys the new heir to the Iron Throne. And Jaehaerys, he was meant to marry Lady Celia of House Tully, but he really wanted to marry his sister, Princess Shaera. So what happened was, these two, they snuck away and they got married in secret. And they consummated the marriage, so there was no backsies. Their father, the king, was like, well, it's done, I guess. Nothing we can do about it now. He wasn't happy about it, but the deed was done. Jaehaerys and Shaera, they seemed to be happy. They wind up having their first child, a son that they named Aerys. And then a few years later, they have another child, a daughter named Rhaella. The fate of Jaehaerys and Shaera's children changed forever when their sister-in-law, Jenny of Oldstones, brought a woods witch to court. And this woods witch said, the prince who was promised will come from the union of your children, of Aerys and Rhaella. Now, King Aegon V, he wasn't overly happy about this, but Jaehaerys, he was convinced. He was like, we've got to do this. Also that one day, one of their descendants will be this elusive prince who was promised. So what happens next is Aerys and Rhaella, they get married. The pair of them are still teenagers. It's not a happy marriage, put it that way. Pretty soon, Jaehaerys and Shaera become grandparents when Aerys and Rhaella have their first child, a son that they called Rhaegar. The very day that Rhaegar was born, the whole family are at Summerhall, which is this Targaryen palace in the Dornish marshes. As Rhaegar is being born, Summerhall erupts into flames. Something has gone very wrong here. This huge inferno has erupted that's killed King Aegon V and Prince Duncan and many others. In this artwork, we see Rhaella giving birth to Rhaegar as the flames erupt around her. Jaehaerys, he'd been the heir to the Iron Throne for a while now, but it's because of the tragedy of Summerhall that ushers in the reign of Jaehaerys II. But the fact that his grandson Rhaegar was born on the same day as the Summerhall tragedy, that's led to speculation from people including Rhaegar himself for a time, who thought that he was the prince who was promised. The prophecy claims that this person will be born amidst smoke and salt. Smoke from the fires, salt from the tears. And Rhaegar Targaryen would go on to make frequent visits to the ruins of Summerhall throughout his life. So in the wake of the Summerhall tragedy, Jaehaerys has become king, Shaera is his queen, and they've had the birth of their first grandchild in Rhaegar. Unfortunately for the new king, a year into his reign, he has to deal with the War of the Ninepenny Kings, which is also the last of the Blackfyre rebellions. This rebellion was led by Meleys Blackfyre, also known as Meleys the Monstrous. Now, it's said that Jaehaerys, he marshalled his troops and did the best he could, and after about a year of fighting, the crown did prevail. Meleys the Monstrous, he was slain by a young Sir Barristan Selmy. Shortly after, Jaehaerys chose Sir Barristan to join his Kingsguard. Years later, when he's talking to Jaehaerys' granddaughter Daenerys, he talks about the memories of House Targaryen, the kings that he served, the members of her house, her family that he knew. And Daenerys, she's giddy. She eats this up because she knows so little about her family. So she wants to know what Sir Barristan experienced. What was he like? What was my grandfather like? What was my father like? What was my brother like? Because he's been a bystander for multiple Targaryen monarchs, Sir Barristan, he feels kind of guilty, as if he's let Jaehaerys down. He felt this duty to his king, and Sir Barristan feels like he wasn't able to help Jaehaerys' son and successor, Jaehaerys, who became known as the Mad King. Sir Barristan says that it was Jaehaerys himself who coined this phrase, that when a Targaryen is born, the gods flip a coin. It's not strictly accurate, but Jaehaerys, he is haunted by what the Woods Witch told him. And that same preoccupation filters down through to Jaehaerys' son, the Mad King, and then later onto his grandson, Rhaegar. They all become entangled in this notion of prophecy. Sadly for Jaehaerys, his reign came to an abrupt end. 3 years after he became king, he passes away after a quick illness. His 18-year-old son, Aerys, succeeds him and becomes Aerys II, and Aerys sits on the Iron Throne for over 20 years, gaining the reputation of the Mad King.